I'm Dean Cifola, and this is the Azure Academy. Continuing with our study on Azure governance, let's jump into the portal and let's go back to our All Services and the Quick Start Center and then set up our Azure environment. So we've already reviewed our RBAC and all the permissions, and that'll come back into play in a few minutes, as well as the overall structure and hierarchy of managing our subscriptions, starting with the management group down to the subscriptions, the resource group, and the resources. Today, we're focusing on policies. What are policies? So a policy is basically a way to enforce your environment to be a certain way. Policies come in a few different kinds and types. A type of a policy could be a policy or an initiative, and the kinds of policies are those effects that those policies then have. For example, the effect could be to deny, or to append, or to audit. And then there's a whole lot that we could do with that, but let me take you to our documentation. Maybe this will make it a little clearer. So under Products, we want to go to Management Tools and then to Azure Policies. And you could look at the overview here, which will give you a good idea of what it all is and how it's different from RBAC, what a policy definition and assignment are, and what parameters are, and then initiatives, which are just collections of policies, which we'll see in a minute. And then some maximums about things related to policies, and then how to manage your policies going forward. You could even watch this tutorial here about going through some governance policies. And overall, policies again are the way to manage your environment by setting standards. And a lot of the policies that you can find are also listed here as samples. So you could say that there are policies that give you certain resource types you're allowed to use. Everything else, you're not. Okay, the effect is to deny. Okay, other kinds of policies, let's say here we go to network security groups, and we want to have a network security group on every subnet. Okay, so if you don't have that, you're denied. Okay, so if you didn't include an NSG, you would be denied. Okay, these are examples of these policies and what you can do with them, and there's some other how-to guides here, as well as some other resources and references for how to implement these things through the portal or PowerShell, CLI, or REST APIs. So with that, let's go to our Azure Policies section and look at the Getting Started page. So policies start off with some kind of definition. Now, that definition is also sometimes referred to as a policy. Once we have the policy, we can use that policy directly or combine it with other policies called an initiative, and then we can assign them. And they can be assigned to a management group, to a subscription, or to a resource group. They can be applied according to our Quick Start Center here from the management group, or applied at the subscription, or applied at a resource group level. So we have a lot of flexibility with policies, and we're going to start off by looking at some definitions. Now, first of all, there are, again, the types of policies, and then there are initiatives, and there's a whole lot of things that are built in to the portal by default. I've got a custom policy here that I built, and that's to have specific locations, and this is a pretty simple policy. Basically, if you're not in the locations which I have permitted, then I'm going to audit or log the fact that you're building something other than where I want it to be. Now, I could do that a different way with a built-in policy, and we'll say here location, so we can search through all this. We can say that there's a built-in policy for allowed locations, and this is relating to resources. This is allowed locations of resource groups. And if you are not in the allowed locations, you will then be denied. So I will not create a resource group other than where I specify it is permitted. So let's assign this policy, and the first thing we have to do is set a scope, and you can see here we can select our management group, and then within that management group we have the option of selecting subscriptions or resource groups. Now, I don't have to select a management group. I can directly select a subscription. But I also don't have to do that. I can select a resource group. Now I've scoped this down to the resource group level. Now if I don't use a resource group here, if I just say that I want this applied to the management group, it would be applied to every subscription within that management group. Or if I say apply this to the subscription, it will then be applied to all resource groups within that subscription. And that's what we'll do right now. And we will not make any exclusions at this point, but we'll say that this is the allowed location for resource groups. And we'll say here US locations only. Okay, and then we have the picker here, which lets us select our resource locations, and then we could assign this. Now, I'm not going to do that at the moment because I want to make an initiative because I think that I like the idea of these two things together. I want to have allowed locations be only in the US and all my resources be only in the US. So let's create a custom initiative. All right, and this is currently scoped to my subscription, and I could change it again to the management group if I wanted to. And we'll say US locations only and US only plus global, and you'll see why I'm doing that in a second. Now you also have the option of categories here. Now existing categories are these built-in ones here. I've created a category already as a custom category called _Microsoft. Now in my picker here, these are the available policy definitions, no different than the ones we just looked at, and I'm going to filter here for locations. And I'm going to say allowed locations and allowed locations for resource groups. Just by clicking the plus, they're here. They're part of my initiative now. Okay, and I will say US locations only. And because this is for resources, some resources are global resources like Azure Traffic Manager. So I will permit that as well. But for the resource groups, I won't use global. There we go. So now we have created an initiative. And we've specified all of our values. So let's go to our initiatives and we'll do a custom here. And there it is. Now, just creating it doesn't do anything. Because if you remember from the getting started, we have to create it and then we have to assign it. Okay, so I'll assign my scope being my entire subscription and the initiative definition. And I will pick my custom initiative. There we go. Okay, and then we will assign that. Okay, so that's assigned. Now, once something is assigned and going through the policy process, it has to check and validate that the compliance state is either compliant or non-compliant, and that does take some time. I've seen it, depending on where you catch it in the cycle, it could be anywhere from a few minutes up to 15 minutes. So with all of the compliance, you just got to sometimes give it some time to go through and check those things. So we've looked at a couple definitions. Let's look at some more stuff that we have here. So there are policies of different kinds. So let's say here we want to audit VMs that do not use managed disks. So walking you through what the policy says here, if, and then any of. Okay, so any of this particular type of resource, which is a virtual machine, using any kind of disk with a URI is true. So the way that managed disk works is managed disks use a Azure resource as the disk. So what does that mean? Well, let me duplicate this tab and show you. Okay, so going into the Azure Academy resource group, you can see here, these are disk resources, and they show up here in the portal. Now, unmanaged disks do not show up here. So let me show you what this is like in code. Okay, so it shows up here, and here's the OS disk, there's the name of the disk, and here is the managed disk ID. And that will be any other kind of resource ID, subscription, resource group, provider is a disk, and then there's the actual name of the disk. Now, this is all very different from using a unmanaged disk, which would have a URI, okay, osdisk.uri. It would actually be a website reference to a VHD file. So what this policy is saying is that if you use a virtual machine and it has a OS disk URI, or you use a virtual machine scale set or a container and that uses a imaged URI, so you're using unmanaged disks. If that is true, then audit that this has happened. Okay, so that's another kind of policy, auditing policies. Also, enforced policies, and we've kind of looked at that already. So if your tag doesn't have this particular value, deny. No creation of that resource without the appropriate tag. And then, of course, there is another policy, which is to append. And that is, if you don't meet this requirement, then add the following. Okay, so those are our basic types of policies, and we've looked at policies and some initiatives already. And we created an assignment. I want to now dive into blueprints. So what are blueprints? Well, it kind of takes the idea of policies and governance and kind of kicks it up a notch. So looking at the getting started section here of blueprints, and this is a function of policies. First, we create a blueprint, we apply that to a scope, and then we can track its assignment. Right now, we have in our portal, in this subscription, so the number 2 subscription, we have these resource groups. Now what I'm going to do is delete them. Okay, so you can see those resource groups are now completely deleted, and I will go here and we will create a blueprint. And we will define this, and a blueprint has to be assigned at a management group level, and then we create artifacts within that. Now, an artifact is one of the following: a policy, a role, a resource manager template, or a resource group. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to assign some roles. Now I can choose to leave these blank for now and have them provide a name of a role when I submit this. However, what I want instead is to specify right now what it is that I want. So let me show you what I've got in my roles currently in my subscription. All right, and you see there's a new interface here for roles. So currently, this is what my roles look like. Now I'm going to add roles for owners, and I have some custom groups created for this. There's my owners group, and then I will add that. And I will add another artifact for a role, and this role will be contributor. And then I have another group for reader. Okay, and these are going to be applied at the entire subscription, and then I can further specify things further down. So let's add another artifact of a resource group. So well, this says resource group hub 00, and we'll have this located in East US. And then we will add another artifact, and this will also be in East US. Okay, now within the resource group, I can further specify roles, policies, or templates. So let's add a resource manager template. We'll say here, new VNets, hub and spoke VNet. And now I'm going to add this code, which is a resource manager template, and it will deploy me a hub network, a spoke network, and a routing table. All right, and I could have also just as easily specified a particular resource manager deployment file, but we'll just leave that as it is for now. Okay, so now we've added some roles, and we've already got a policy assigned that we've already done, and we've got a resource manager template here, so we'll save this as a draft. Okay, so now here's our policy definition, or our blueprint definition for a new subscription. Okay, and that's our outline. So then we could either publish it right from here or continue to edit it or delete it. So the version is currently draft. So you can create these things all the livelong day and not actually apply them until you're ready. So now I'm ready, so I'm going to publish this, and this will be version 1.0, and we'll publish that. Okay, so going back to our getting started, we have now got to apply this. So we're selecting our subscription, and we only have this option because that's the one that's part of our management group. New sub, and this will be in the East US region, and then you have the option of picking whatever version you want of that. And then we have this thing here called lock assignment. Now, I would definitely recommend that you not use this for right now, but here's in the documentation where you can see what the lock assignments are referring to. And just to get you back to the same place, let's go back to the root of our docs. We'll go to Products, Management Tools, Blueprints, and then in here we can go to Resource Locking in Blueprints. All right, so the lock basically will say that once you make the lock, nothing can be added, nothing can be deleted, nothing can be changed except by modifying the blueprint assignment. I'm good with not using the lock, and I suggest you do not use the lock until you are more familiar with how to use these things. Now we have the parameters to make our assignment. Now we've already specified the name of our hub and our spoke and what location they're in. And according to the code that I have, the input parameter requires that I put in the first 2 octets and then you leave the last 2 octets blank. So I've got that specified here, and now we're going to assign it. So again, just to review, there is currently none of those custom groups that I had here, which all started out with MS Dean. None of those custom groups are currently assigned to the permissions. And when we look at the resource groups for that particular subscription, we don't have a hub and a spoke. And we certainly don't have anything built in there yet. So now our policy assignment has been made correctly, and now we can go in here to track the assignment. And it's currently in a waiting state. It'll go from waiting to deploying, and then it'll be finished. So let's give this a minute. Okay, we're now in a deploying state, and you can see we've added our role assignments, and looks like we've got a resource group creating. Okay, so our assignment has completed successfully, and we should have gotten our 3 roles, a hub and a spoke, and a hub and a spoke virtual network with peerings, and then a route table. So let's go back. Here's our permissions. And there it is. We've got our contributor role, our owner role, and our reader role. And if we look at our resource groups, there's our hub and our spoke. And inside here, we've got our hub and our spoke virtual network. Okay, so inside our network, we've got our peer setup, and that's talking to our spoke. So all of that deployed from a blueprint. Okay, you can always go back and look at what it was that you deployed and what version you deployed. And then you can also go to your blueprint definitions, and you can continue to edit them as well as unassign them and update them. All right, so looking back at our compliance here, our policy is currently 100% compliant. And that was where we specified only US locations are permitted, and there were 10 resources that were scanned in 4 resource groups, and they are all in a compliant state. So this has been a basic overview of policies and blueprints and how you can use those across your environment to be able to specify what you want, how you want it set up, and also provision resources in a compliant manner so that you can specify new environment configurations and get them deployed with permissions, policies, ARM templates for resources, as well as deploy resource groups. So you can set up a new region, new subscription, whatever it is that you need through blueprints, and then apply policies on top of all of that so that you can make everything conform to the standards that you have assigned and decided upon, rather than have people just going rogue and doing whatever they want, costing you extra money. And next we'll dig into the Azure Security Center, and then we'll finish up with talking about some some of the monitoring aspects of governance. Click on that subscribe button, hit the like, click the notification icon. We put out a video about once a week, and we've got a couple different topics going right now. Feel free to comment, let us know what you'd be interested in so that we can give you what you're looking for on your Azure journey.